Well, hello and welcome to another amazing guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and this episode, we're going to be doing some really cool stuff. We're going to be talking about making decisions as a business owner. We're going to be talking about leadership, team development. Really, really excited to have a two-time published author here as our podcast guest. His name is Paul Epstein, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and leadership expert. He is a dynamic leadership and culture expert with a passion for sparking transformation and driving excellence. With a background in reviving underperforming sports teams and igniting growth in organizations, he's known for his innovative approach to purpose-driven leadership and fostering resilient mindsets. As the author of The Power of Playing Offense and soon to release Better Decisions Faster books, his mission is to empower individuals and teams to unleash their potential and thrive in today's fast-paced world. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Moshe. Fired up to be here.
As am I. Although I don't know if for some of my audience, they know, but some of them may not. We batch our recordings. So I do a podcast recording day and I record once a month, and they're literally back to back to back. I get a 15-minute break in between each one, but the way it works is I never get the 15-minute break because I go over or I spend too much time in the green room before. So it's the tail end. It is 3:30 in the afternoon for me here in New York, and you're the last interview. So I am going to try to keep my energy up, but I'm really excited about the content that you have and to just dive into a conversation around it. But before we do that, my audience, some of them may know who Paul Epstein is. I don't. I just met you. And I would love for you to paint the picture for those who don't know you or may not know enough about you. How in the world did you become a leadership expert? There was mention in your intro about helping sports teams. Give me the story of how you got here today. Sounds really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand the audience that we're obviously engaging with. So I mentioned when we were in the green room, do a ton of work within the legal space from owners and beyond. But really my backstory is 15-year NFL and NBA executive. So in the most high-flying, high-performing, high-achieving environments. And I came up through the sales ranks. So it was always from an entry to an executive level. It was selling the unsellable. You know, I'm from LA. I get a gig at Staples Center, which everybody thinks about the Lakers first and foremost. And, oh, Paul, you must be hanging out with Jack Nicholson and the Laker girls. And this was 2005. You must be hanging out with Kobe and Shaq. The problem was I didn't work for the Lakers because they had nothing to sell. So I worked for the other team. I worked for the Clippers. And ESPN called us the worst brand in sports. My second week on the job, the front cover of Sports Illustrated says, "You are the worst franchise in sports history. Try selling that." And that was the earliest test that I had, where I call it playing offense in a defensive environment. Defense, everybody listening to this deals with defense. It's every hurdle that you have, every struggle, every obstacle, every challenge. Sometimes it's macro stuff like the economy or a pandemic. Sometimes it's micro, like a mindset or effort or attitude or energy or whatever the case is, more of the controllable stuff. And I just found this very unique way to say, if I can control whether the teams that I work for win or lose a game, but I'm still responsible for a number at the end of the day, what do I control? How can I play offense in these highly defensive, uncontrollable, uncertain environments? And that got me on a fast pass, because not only from excelling at sales production, it then became a thing where the side of business that really pulled at my heart was always the people side, the leadership side, the culture side. So even when I was in a revenue generating role, I always kind of went to the locker room side of things, the camaraderie, the connection, the bear hugs. Like, that's the part that really, really got me out of bed. And so naturally, getting in a positional leadership role was something that I loved, and it felt right and it felt natural. And to use a sports metaphor, whether you're a sports fan or not, I just use it as a backdrop, but everybody kind of would understand this analogy. So in sports, let's say, regardless of what sport you watch, it could be everything from soccer to football to you name it. If you were an amazing player, does it mean that you're destined to be a great coach?
Nope.
And for most of us, of course, right? A pretty easy answer. Like, no, you might, but it's not a default. It's not a guarantee. But in business, all that we do is promote the best players into coaching. That's all that we do. And we wonder why we have leadership problems, because sometimes leaders aren't supposed to be in those seats, and or because I'm not going to point fingers and place the blame game here. The other challenge is, here's a scary stat for you. 58% of leaders have never received a single day of leadership training. Almost 6 out of 10 people that manage others have never sat in a classroom setting for 8 hours and said, so how do I manage? What they did is they kicked butt as a lawyer, an accountant, a salesperson, whatever, and now they supervise those people and they don't get developed. And so for me, that story is not that different. I got promoted from player to coach. I'm a sales manager still in the NBA. This is over a decade ago now. And I asked for a playbook and I got a blank stare. And so, yes, I figured it out. A lot of pain, a lot of mistakes, a lot of trial and error. But I also was surrounded by amazing people. And I also figured out how to lead myself before I effectively lead others. So that led me on a 15-year fast track from LA to New Orleans to Sacramento, New York, NFL league office, broke some Super Bowl revenue records. And then I was head of revenue for the San Francisco 49ers. All of that in a decade and a half. And when I emerged from that and took the leap out of sports, now to, as you said, be an author and speaker and thought leader. And I do consulting off stage to really continue the impact that I ignite on stage. Really, the power of playing offense, which is my first book, Moshe, it was simply the leadership playbook that I never had because I felt like I needed it so badly when I was promoted from player to coach and I didn't get it. But instead of complaining about the problem and the gap, I decided to write the solution.
I love you sharing that story, Paul. And I'm going to sidetrack for a second because you mentioned Shaq. And I was at a birthday party on Sunday, and my son Tyler says, "Hey, Dad, did you know that Shaq only scored 1 3-point shot in his entire career?" And I said, "That doesn't sound right. I need to fact check you." Now, my son is like the encyclopedia of facts. Like that's all he does all day. Is like, so I went on Google and I looked, and sure enough, he took a total of 22 3-point shot attempts in his entire career and only made one of them. So interesting point there.
I'm actually surprised he made one. He could barely make a free throw.
Yeah. So, well, he made one.
He made one.
So yeah, so that's an interesting factoid for you. Great story. My son Tyler is really I mean, he's a rising Jeopardy star for sure.
I love it.
So I want to actually focus on your new book first, Better Decisions Faster, because I find in my line of work, working with law firm owners, especially smaller firm owners, one of the things that really holds them back from growth is just being stuck in indecision. And that is, I think it's primarily based in fear.
Sure.
You know, whenever we're afraid to make a decision, it's because we're afraid of the outcome.
Yep.
And I talk on the podcast a lot about how the outcome that you fear of achieving is exactly what you're going to get when you don't take the action that you're afraid of. And you know, so, but I'm curious to know what's your expert knowledge on making decisions. You wrote a whole book on it. What's happening here with indecision, and how do we as business owners approach decisions from a different way so that we can do a better job of not getting stuck? You know, because it really, I mean, when you're on a time frame, like, okay, I'm going to get this done this quarter, and then I get stuck with the first decision I need to make, and now I'm sitting on that for 2 weeks. Well, I'm not getting this done in this quarter because I just delayed it by 2 weeks. So it really slows us down from moving the needle forward in our business growth.
100%. You hit the nail on the head. And really, to me, as much as we brought up the first book, Power of Playing Offense, you said, let's focus on the latest. They're inextricably linked. And here's how. So when you go back to the lab and naturally people come up to you and say, what do people that play offense do that those that play defense don't? And I mean this at an individual level, a team level, an organizational level, a cultural level. And my team and I went back to the lab and we really researched this, both in the trenches, in our consulting practice, even me hosting my podcast. Like I was really trying to identify, like, how do I distill this down to a couple of key themes? And here's where we landed. Those that play offense are highly decisive. They are extremely comfortable with imperfect action. They're not outcome based. They're action based. And because of that, they don't fall victim to the silent killer of indecision. Because here's what the research says, and this is kind of scary. Today, every single person listening to this, including you and I, we're each going to make 35,000 decisions in a day. The average adult makes 35,000 decisions in a day. Now, yes, most of them on autopilot. But then there's those critical few that truly, like if you were to audit your past and I say, all right, Moshe, let's play a game here. Audit your past, brother, for better or worse. The decisions you've made relative to career, job, health, relationships. Show me the quality of your decisions. I'll show you the quality of your life. And none of us are immune from that. So we make so many decisions. They've got such high stakes and consequence. And then I ask people, well, what's your process? What's your system? You have to have one if there's such significance and value in it. And very rarely do I get a concrete answer. Some people say, oh, well, I measure risk versus reward, logic and emotion, and all that. And I'm like, oh, cool. So you do that for all your big decisions? And then I get a blank stare. So I realized that there's a big gap in the market. And that's why for every legal owner and beyond out there, that's why decision fatigue is a thing. That's why decision overwhelm is a thing. That's why paralysis is a thing. We all struggle with indecision. And my theory is, you said fear, and I think that's right. I think fear, risk, uncertainty, anxiety, the unknown, the consequence, the worrying too much what other people are going to think. Every decision in the moment feels so massive. But then if we go forward 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, eventually it won't matter. But in the moment, we freeze and we're paralyzed. And so my theory is that unless people have a go-to process or system, they're not going to consistently make better decisions faster. You might get lucky and we might have some positive outcomes to share, but I wrote the book because I wanted a decision-making solution that could scale. So whether you're running a 3-person practice, a 30-person practice, or a 3,000-person practice, every single person in your firm can make better decisions faster. And the process is very simple to understand. This is the how-to. This is the application for making better decisions faster. I call it the head, heart, hands equation. Head is your mindset. Heart is your authenticity. That's your truth. And then hands are action. The equation is head plus heart equals hands. In other words, when deciding whether to use your hands, whether to take action, there's 2 checkpoints, head and heart. Head, do I think it's a good idea? Heart, do I feel it's a good idea? And just like every intersection that you drive up to, there's a very familiar signal to use here. When your head and heart are on board, it's a green light. 100% of the time, head and heart are in, take action. No head, no heart, red light. And when one of the two, head or heart, is on board, that's a yellow light. So I wrote Better Decisions Faster to fill our firm, our career, our lives, our teams with more green lights. Now that we're aware, let's stop running reds. And here's the playbook for how to navigate the messy middle of yellow.
I love the simplicity of your system. It's true. And definitely when the head and heart is both on board. And I love the green light, yellow light, red light idea, right? Like, don't run reds. Oh, green is always go. and then let's deal with the yellows. So let's deal with the yellows. So what
Yeah,
is the
let's do it.
process to try to figure out, okay, I've got one, but not the other. So either my head's in the game or my heart's in the game. Um, how do I convert one to the other side?
Yeah, great question. And by the way, what all of my research is showing is that the majority of our decisions are going to land in yellow. Okay. So we're not talking about the 10% exceptions here. I would ballpark 70 to 80% of our decisions, if we pass them through this filter, you're going to land in yellow. So listen up. This is the
Right.
most relevant part of the conversation. Go ahead.
And I think also, if you think about it, like we may not even think of the ones that are green as decisions because it's so obvious to us we're just doing it.
There you
Right.
go.
So it's not like, oh, why are we in indecision? Because we're in yellow.
Yeah, I think you're right. And here's, I'll come back to yellows in just a quick sec, but the reality is this: greens and reds are simply about awareness. Now that you're aware of what a green is, you don't need Paul after that. It's like, hey, you hear this, you'll recognize greens. What I hope this does, though, is inspire you to kind of fill your life with more greens. So now you could say, wow, my friend's got some negative energy. Like, wow, this coworker of mine, like you can start to assess kind of who you're surrounding yourself with, or how are you investing your time, or what are your investment decisions, all of these different things. When you taste green, you just want more of it. So I just gave people a simple language and framework to say, I want more green. And also the other side is reds. There's a lot of problems and challenges, Moshe, all around us every single day. Burnout. I'm stuck. I'm fatigued. I'm exhausted. I'm lost. I'm lacking a little hope and optimism. I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled. Any of these things are not a byproduct of running one red light. It means we've been subconsciously running them for months or years. And then we get to this place and we ask ourselves, how the hell did I get here? Well, we were running red lights. And so when I say I wrote the book to fill our lives with more greens and to stop running reds, both of those are simply about awareness. One, fill your life with as many as possible. The other one, now that you're aware, stop running them. And we're good. Okay, so now we're at yellow. This is the hard stuff.
Yeah, I would think that even some of the what you described as the byproduct of running reds might even be the byproduct of running too many yellows, that some of
Bingo.
them should have been downgraded to red.
So here, brilliant segue. And here's a bit about yellow. Not all yellows are created equal, meaning head on board versus heart on board. My perspective is very different. I believe that one is a very slow death, and the other one, you stay in the fight. Let's talk about the slow death first. When only your head is on board, it's a slow death for a few reasons. One, your heart's not going to change. Just be real. Be honest with yourself. You're not going to wake up tomorrow with a different heart. Your heart's not going to be different next week or next month. So stop lying. Stop. Like, oh, this person's not the one. They're never going to be the one. I hate my job. You're never going to love the job. Your heart is out and it's going to stay out. So either a red light, boom, at least you can pull the trigger and be done. But this yellow where we stay with it, and it's a permanent head only, that is more deadly than a red, because you also lose the time. You also lose the time. It's kind of that death by 1,000 cuts. So that's the bad yellow. The other yellow, and by the way,
I'll interrupt you for a
yeah,
second.
go ahead.
So
Go.
just to share my own personal experience, I spent 20 years in the IT industry. Starting this business was a complete career change for me. Actually started as an accounting firm, and then I went into business coaching and advisory services. But the reason that I left the IT industry was because it was a head only job. Because when I did it, looked at it and said, what am I getting out of this? Am I feeling fulfilled? Is this the purpose that I have in this world? The answer was no. And although I was really good at what I did, that's the head part of it, right? Like I was excellent at what I was doing. At the end of the day, it wasn't fulfilling me emotionally. Like I didn't feel like that was the thing that I needed to be doing, and that's why I gave it up. So I like that. I feel I feel like validated right now, because that was that was the right decision, because ultimately you got to follow your heart.
100%. And here's, all right, let's speak to everybody that's tuning in, law firm owners. All right. So you manage a team, again, small team, medium team, big team, but you lead people, you lead a team. Awesome. I've led a lot of teams as well. And I fell prisoner to this bad yellow many times. And especially, so here's the thing. I was leading groups of sales executives. So we had a number in the legal space. It's that client and business development, right? Like we got to win the business. We got to earn the business, right? And so different industries, but same concept. And here's the bad yellow. And here's what it looks like. I kept so many people solely because of production. They're really good at selling widgets, but they were toxic in the locker room.
Right. They're complete assholes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if that's the case, in my head, I said, keep them, i.e., keep their production. My heart knew they weren't a keeper, but I kept them. And every single time I regretted it because it's a slow death because it wasn't just they were negative and toxic. Now they were polluting my team. They were polluting our locker room. So the scale and the compounding, oh, I've got retention issues. Maybe you've got some bad yellows that are polluting the team. And then you're like, oh, but my good people keep leaving. Maybe we should do an audit and assessment on what light each person is on the team. That's the perspective of the bad yellow in more of that locker room type environment. But the opposite's also true.
Yeah, that's why the New York Giants got rid of Odell Beckham Jr. Right?
Yeah, it's a good analogy, right? Regardless of what team you root for, if here's a kind of a way to think about it. Why is somebody, whether Odell or whoever, if you're top 5 or top 10 at your position at your peak, and you've been on just as many teams as the rank that you are at your position, there's a problem. There's a problem. People love your production. Why have you been on 5 teams and separated from injury and all this stuff? Doesn't matter. When you're a green light, they'll wait it out. Hey, if it's going to take you 9 months to get healthy, I'll wait for a green. But when it's a yellow or red, you're like, man, I got to cut my losses.
Do you think that's what's happening with Baker Mayfield too? Because I don't get the idea that he's a toxic, person. So why is he on the third, starting for a third team in 3 years?
I think I mean this respectfully, but look, Odell at his peak was one of the top receivers in football. I don't think talent wise, Baker's one of the best quarterbacks. I think he's a fringe starter. And so, you could argue that his ego gets in the way. And I think he thinks he's better than he is. But regardless, you're right. I think people don't like him because of how he comes across, but his teammates do like him when he's there. I just think there's 20 better quarterbacks in the league. And so once you get into that game, so anyways, a little bit of the weeds of sports, but that is a good way to kind of assess personnel. Now let's talk about the other yellow, when your heart is in, but your head's not. In this one, almost always, there's some rare exceptions, but almost always the proper thing to do is to stay in the fight. It's not easy, but if you can clear up whatever hurdles you're facing from the neck up, and I'll share a personal example from my life that's it's very personal, very raw, very vulnerable. I'll share it in a second. But, here's my thought is it's so hard to find things, whether business or life, where your heart is in. So why waste it? Don't ruin those rare opportunities when your heart says, hell yes. You may have some things you need to overcome in your head. That maybe there's a self-limiting belief. Maybe there's a financial scare. Like my heart knows the industry it wants to leap toward, but my head says, oh, but I'm not going to make money there. Cool. Well, then it's a financial thing. And that doesn't mean make the leap tomorrow. But what are you doing in the meanwhile to make your heart kind of fuel your journey forward? And then eventually financially your head can jump on board, right? Maybe you need to bring in a coach. I have 4 coaches. I hire coaches all the time for anything that's important to me because I need to sometimes get out of my own way. That's all head work that I need help with. My heart knows what it wants, right? If it's something really deep and personal, this is where things like therapy come into play. Like, again, I don't want to take it lightly. I'm just saying your heart knows what it knows. Sometimes we just need to get some pollution out of our head. So, untangle that web. But here is my example. So every one of us has a hero. For me, my hero is my dad. And I lost my hero at 19 years old. He was a continuation school teacher. Years after he passes, I run into some of his former students, and a continuation is a kid's last chance. So these kids are coming up to me, recognizing me from when I was standing on the side of the stage they graduated from. And I heard things, Moshe, like, your dad was the first person that ever believed in me. Your dad gave me a reason to think that tomorrow was worth it. And this, in my 20s, at a really young age, molded how I thought about what leadership really is, how personal it gets, what impact is, how do you make a difference that counts? How do you leave people in places better than you found them? But ultimately, my dad was my hero. And then I became a dad. And 6 months into my journey, I felt like the exact opposite of a hero. My heart was so in wanting to be the best dad and to be a hero. But I felt like I was in the darkest storm mentally I'd ever been in, like this new role, this new hat, this new responsibility, the sleepless nights. It was negatively impacting my work. I missed my best friend, my wife, and that connection. Like I missed my old life, if I'm being honest. But my heart didn't waver. My heart knew it was in, but my head was like, dude, this sucks. Like, what is going on? I needed help. I really needed help from the neck up. And so I was afraid of opening up about this. And most importantly, I was like, man, do I talk to my best friend, my rock, my wife? Like no. She would judge me. She's going to judge me as a husband, as a parent, no. But then finally, Moshe, I just hit rock bottom, man. And I was like, screw that, dude. I got to tell her, because I felt broken. And I finally did open up. And then her response was something I did not expect. She said, I've been waiting to have this. What's that? What'd she say?
Me too.
Yeah. She said, I've been waiting to have this conversation for a couple months. And we got this. We're going to get through this. Go out, talk to your friends, the same ones that told you it was a Hallmark card, which is part of where my shame came from. All my buddies were like, oh, dude, being a dad's a Hallmark card. And then when I called them and told them, I was like, bro, I'm broken. And then they're like, yeah, dude, for the first year or 2 years, I felt like that too. And I'm like, you told me it was a Hallmark card. And so anyways, now I can laugh about it. At the time, though, it was brutal. And I share this with you because this is an example, a very personal, deep example of like, I was in like the good yellow, like the heart was in, but I needed that courageous conversation. I needed the time to process. I needed to be vulnerable. I needed to be open. I'm still healing by even sharing this with you and your audience right now of like, this is all good. Maybe me sharing this, maybe there's a good yellow of somebody listening out there right now where their heart is in, but their head's like getting in the way. And so from me to you, whoever you are out there listening in, just stay in the fight. And this is an example of the best yellow possible when your heart is the starting point and it's in.
Paul, I love this story that you shared, but it brings to mind a question, and this is something that I'm grappling with.
Sure.
Your whole story was in the yellow after the decision, right? Your decision was to have a child. And the yellow or the story is, okay, how did I deal with it after the decision when my heart was in it, but my head wasn't? When you made the decision to have a child, I'm not sure if your head wasn't in it at that point, right? You thought it was easy, right? Yeah. So great story. I really like it. But I'm just wondering, how does somebody take that action? How do they make that decision? Sure, after they make the decision, we can think about Paul and his being a dad, right? And sure. How old's your kid now?
2.5.
And now do you feel the same way?
Now he's agreeing, but actually this is a brilliant conversation that we're having. I'll take a minute or two on this one. Let me tell you about the decision to not have the first kid. I'll be very honest with you. So as we record this, we're expecting our second.
And we are too. I mean, not our second, but we're also expecting.
Love it, man. Well, congrats, dude. So bear hugs.
Thank you. Congrats to you as well.
Thank you. So here's the reality. following this story that I just shared, we had the conversation. Do we stay at one or do we have two? And this is with all that story in the rear view mirror, everything I've been through. Look, part of it is I'm an only child. So full transparency, I was pro one, not just because of the storm I went through. Like I was like, no, like I see a lot of benefits in it and the independence and da. My wife has a sibling, so she was pro two. So if we put it in colors, she was a green to have a second kid and I was a yellow, not because of the storm, but just because I was like, hey, pro one kid. Like that's just my personal opinion. It's all good. And so I'm talking to I know that we're getting personal and family oriented here, but I think this applies to every single person listening in, even putting a law firm ownership cap on, because we're always going to have conversations with our team members, with our fellow partners, with whomever, where sometimes you don't agree on the color. And assuming there's no red in there, assuming it's a yellow green type conversation, what a healthy way to build a bridge where my wife and I, there were no daggers thrown. There was no judgment. There was no like negativity or hate or whatever about like, I can't believe you don't want to. Nope. Just two adults having a conversation about why we feel a certain way. And I explained my yellow, open face cards, no punches held back. Here are all my concerns with having a second kid. And she said, well, here's my reasons for agreeing. And ultimately, in typical fashion, I get outvoted 1-1, but that's a different story. but I think more important than all that is here's kind of how we did the tiebreaker. And you could apply this to a business scenario as well. The intensity of the color matters as well. She was a very deep green, like she really wanted a second kid. Me, I prefer to have one, but the way I thought about it was the bigger green light is her. So for me to have a life with her, I'm deep green on that. And I'm a soft yellow for having a second kid. So for me being soft yellow, her being hard green, I'm like, sounds like I'm going to go to her side. And I would hope that she would have done the opposite had it been flipped. But that's just kind of how the cards shook out. So, I think that's a really cool universal way of thinking about this. Yeah, you're right. My first story is like post, but then I should say, made a decision collectively and collaboratively about like, let's just be honest about why we feel a certain way about the color. And that created a healthy discord.
Yeah, I love that. And highlighting the intensity of the color as well. So do you give some tools in your book for how to determine the intensity of the color and how to determine where you are on the heart versus head side? It's great to simplify it in this way. But I'm wondering if our audience is grappling with, do I even have the tools to figure out the answer to these basic questions?
Yeah. So if we thought of life as a game, we all know that, all right, people associate games with sports. And we all know that when the bright lights are on, that's the game. But the way that people show up, the athletes show up for the game, it's what they do in the unseen hours. Also, how they practice. So when I say the word drill, you often associate it with a practice drill. To your point, this book has dozens of decision drills because I think decision-making needs to be practiced. It needs to be thought through. It needs to be processed. You need to take some notes on it. I don't think we should be flipping about, especially big decisions. Like when I say better decisions faster, by the way, people look at that word faster like, no, some of my worst decisions because I went too fast. Hold on. So for one, I would challenge like, well, we didn't have the head, heart, hands equation. So maybe it was all head or all heart. And therefore it led to an outcome you didn't want. So I think that's one aspect of it. But also like with very big decisions, like for me, like this whole like leap out of an industry to become an entrepreneur and bet on myself and like all these big swings of the bat. Sometimes it took me 7, 8, 9 months to make those decisions versus I could have just stayed on the sideline the rest of my life. So is 9 months fast? No, but it's faster than never. Or it's faster than 5 years. So I just want to add some context. Now,
going back to the word faster is it you have to have something you're comparing it to be able to say whether it's faster or slower. And it can always be faster than something else.
Absolutely. It's all contextual relevant. But so here's the difference between Power of Playing Offense, my first book, and Better Decisions Faster, my second book. The first book, was largely a story of my 15 years in sports and all the leadership things that I'm very proud of, and also the biggest mistakes I made. And hopefully those can be our greatest teachers. I think we learn more from failure than success, no doubt about it. So the second book is not about me. It's me shining a light on some of the most confident decision makers that I know. And I have a section on the head, which is about elevating our mindset and unlocking our mindset. I have a section on the heart, which is leading with authenticity. And I have a section on the hands, which is driving purposeful action. And within those, there's different green lights. So the head's going to have different green lights like growth and positivity. The heart's going to have different green lights like I mentioned, authenticity and happiness could be a couple of examples. The hands are going to have things like courage and impact. And so looking into each of those within each chapter, I shine a light on multiple people and I tell their story and I only keep what's contextually relevant. And then I take our readers and audience through a decision drill, and they literally get to get messy with this decision drill. So each drill is designed to either decide, would this scenario lead you to a green, yellow, or red? Hey, what are your top 5 relative to this green light and this value? Because now you can understand, man, my head's feeling pretty confident, but my heart, maybe I've been lacking a little authenticity in these settings. So I'm basically revealing decision gaps. And it's all in the spirit of making better decisions faster. So this is, as much as it is inspirational, it's equal parts actionable. And it's these decision drills. By the end of the book, you'll have several dozen that you'll get to go through. And so my plan is that obviously through the journey, you become the most confident version of yourself, and confidence breeds better decisions, breeds better actions.
I love this. And to wrap up the conversation, because we're just about out of time, folks, making good decisions, both in your business and your personal lives, is really the key to success. I mean, ultimately, when we boil down and look at, like, if I look at 2 different business owners and why is one so far ahead of the other, and we really look at it, it always boils down to the decisions, not just whether they made good decisions or bad decisions. It's whether they made decisions quickly, whether they were able to get out of the default indecision is a no, right? So like if you're undecided, you've basically chose no. As a matter of fact, recently my wife was asking me a question and she said, hey, are we going to do this or are we going to do that? I didn't answer her. And then she asked it again. I didn't answer her. And then the third time she said, is you not answering me because the answer is no? And that's what's happening when we're in indecision, is we are by default choosing not to do something because we're unable to make a decision or unwilling to make a decision. And ultimately, if we look at our everything in our business, everything that we are dealing with today is a product of the decisions or lack of decisions that we've made up until now. I love this book. I love this concept and I love this conversation, Paul, and I can't wait to read your book. Folks, this book is being released imminently. If you're listening to this podcast when it gets released, it's going to be this coming Tuesday, September 26th. If you're listening to it after September 26th, it's already available. Either way, go buy it, either pre-purchase it or buy the book. We also have a book club called The Reader's Nook for law firm owners. And it's free to join. And I am going to talk to Mimi, who runs it, about getting Paul's book on the slate for the Reader's Nook. So if you want to sign up for that, go to profitwithlaw.com/book club, profitwithlaw.com/book club. To Paul, to wrap this up, I want to ask you 2 things. Number 1, what is one parting piece of advice or wisdom you want to leave with our audience? Number 2, how can they take the next step with you? Or is there something you want to share with them? How do they get the book? Whatever, anything that you want to direct our audience who's very interested in you and this conversation to take the next steps with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I get to the parting word of advice, so anything and everything, paulepsteinspeaks.com, that's going to have a treasure trove of just information to really process and digest. My final advice would be this. Head, heart, hands is kind of a spin on think, feel, do, which we've all heard of. And if we look at think, feel, do, I don't think we need to think more or do more. I think we're good in the head and the hands category, where I've identified that a lot of us innocently bypass. It's our heart, because we've been raised to make the smart decision from where do you work and what industry and where do you go to school. And like, it's a lot of logic that's out there, but yet we're so focused on making the smart decision. And then we have a blinder on to heart decisions. And so I'm not here to impress that the heart is more important, as easy as it would be to make that argument. It's not an or, it's a yes and. It's not head or heart equals hands. It's head plus heart equals hands. And so continue on your path and ask yourself if it logically makes sense. But where I implore all of us to come from is that there's a lot less traffic on the road that leads from the heart. And when you lead from your heart, it's bound to get you the outcomes and the success and the significance and the purpose and the impact that you want. Because if your heart's not on board, well, now you have a roadmap to realize it's a dead end. But if your heart is on board, it's one of two things. It's already a green light, or it's the good yellow. The good yellow we talked about. The good yellow where you just stay in the fight. So lead from the heart. And I believe that that is the path to every single piece of success and significance that we need.
Awesome, Paul. Thank you. Thank you so much. Folks, we are going to put in the resources section of the show notes page all the links that we talked about, including the link to Amazon to pick up the book Better Decisions Faster, as well as Paul's first book. And we will also put his Paul Epstein Speaks URL. So you don't have to remember any of this. Just go to profitwithlaw.com. Show notes page is there, or in your podcast player. Just click the description. You'll see it in the resources section. We've got everything linked up for you. If this is your first time tuning in, you tuned into a good one. We had a great conversation, some really heartfelt stories, probably had some people with their tears going. You want to come back for more? We have conversations like this every single week. Every Thursday, we bring another amazing guest expert here on the show. So tune back in by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast player so that you can get notified when we are releasing that next episode. And if you've been with us for a while, we would love it if you left us a rating or review in your podcast player. We love and thrive on those reviews, and we appreciate you taking the time to do that for us. We'll catch you next Thursday as we release our next episode. Enjoy your weekend. Take care.